Hey guys, we're going to be doing notes for factoring by grouping. And factoring by grouping is for expressions that are an even number of terms. So a lot of the ones that we're going to look at today have 4 terms. Our first thing that we want to do is write our problem in descending order, and that means the greatest exponent goes first. Then we're going to look for any greatest common factor, a GCF, and that would be something that divides into all the terms of your expression. Our third step is to group the terms by 2's or 3's, depending on whether we've got a group of 4, that will be grouped by 2's, or if we have a group of like 6 terms, we would group by 3's. Then we factor out the GCF for each group. And if factoring by grouping works, then the polynomial that you have left inside the parentheses should be the exact same expression. We're going to factor out the parentheses, the polynomial that was in common, to get our answer, and we'll typically have 2 sets of parentheses with stuff inside if factoring by grouping is working. So let's see what we've got going on. So in example A, I've got 2x cubed plus 10x squared plus 3x plus 15, and I have 4 terms for this. So because there are 4 terms, I'm going to try grouping. So 4 terms means we're going to try grouping. And before I get going with the actual grouping, I'm going to look and I'm going to see if there is an expression that would divide into every single term. So I'm looking at all 4 terms, and I don't see a number, a coefficient other than 1 that would go into all 4 terms. And I'm noticing that all 4 terms don't have letters. So that last term at the end with the 15, that's just plain, it doesn't have a letter at the end. So I don't have a GCF. So that's great. Now we're going to get going with our factoring. So we've got 4 terms, and we're going to group this into 2 equal-sized groups. So our first group I'm going to underline in blue, and then our second group I'm going to choose purple. So I've got the 2x cubed plus 10x squared, and we are going to take out a greatest common factor. So I'm going to start off, and I'm noticing that in 2x cubed plus 10x squared, that 2 divides into 2 and 10, and that the 2 terms there that are with the blue box, they have an x squared in common. They both have x's, and the smallest exponent is x squared. So now I'm going to do the factoring, and I'm going to be thinking to myself, and again I'm thinking, and I'm just going to do this on the side so we've got a record of it. So I'm thinking 2x cubed divided by 2x squared, and the 2's would cancel out, and from x cubed that means there's 3 x's in a row, x squared means there were 2 x's in a row, so I have an x that is left over. Alright, now we're going to take our second term, our 10x squared, and we're going to be thinking divide by 2x squared. Okay, so the x squareds would cancel out, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. And that's a positive 5, so I'm going to write down plus 5. For my second grouping, my second half of the problem, I'm going to use the sign that I see that's in front of the third term. So I'm going to use a plus. And now I'm going to look at 3x plus 5 and think about what divides into 3x and what divides into 5 evenly. And when I think about that, I'm like, a 3 divides into 3x and into 15. So I'm writing down the 3, that's the GCF. So now I'm thinking 3x divided by 3. The 3's would cancel out, and I would have an x left over. Next I'm going to be thinking 15 divided by 3. So 15 divided by 3 is 5, and it's a positive 5, so I'm going to write down plus 5. Okay, so we're halfway through with our factoring by grouping, but we aren't all done yet because we still have addition between 2 portions of our problem instead of multiplication. So again, factoring is our process of going from a sum of terms into a product of terms. And so I need to make this become a product. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to look at my 2 terms. The first term that I've got is the stuff in blue, and the second term that I've got is the stuff that's in purple. And in both of those sections, I notice that the parentheses are exactly the same. So the parentheses that are the same are this x plus 5. So that's our new GCF. So we're going to divide that out. And then, because we're dividing, we're going to have multiplication left over. I'm going to be thinking about what's left over. So when I take the x plus 5 out of the light blue stuff, I end up having this 2x squared left over. And when I take the x plus 5 out of the second set, I've got a positive 3 that's left over. So my final answer is going to be the quantity of x plus 5 times the quantity of 2x squared plus 3. So I need two sets of parentheses with stuff inside, one right after the other. Okay, let's go through our next problem. So in our next problem, I see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So because there are 4 terms, we're going to be doing grouping. So let's look at our first group. And by the way, these are in descending order because the exponents go 3, 2, 1, and then a constant. So there's 3, 2, 1, and then the constant. So we're going to be doing grouping. So in the first group, I'm going to look at the w cubed minus 7w squared. In the second group, I'm going to be looking at the 4w minus 28. Okay, so we take the GCF out of each of those groups first. So I'm looking at w cubed minus 7w squared, and for sure there's a letter w that's in common, and the exponent that's in common is a 2. And again, I'm going to be dividing to figure out what's left over. So I'm thinking w cubed divided by w squared. W cubed divided by w squared is w. Then I'm going to be thinking negative 7w squared divided by w squared. So the w squares cancel out, and I'm left over with a negative 7. So I'm going to write down the minus 7 after the w. For my second set of grouping, I'm looking at 4w minus 28. And the value that goes into that is going to be a 4. And I'm going to use the sign of the third term. So I have to have a plus because the third term sign had a plus in front of it. And 4 was what went into 4w and into 28. So I'm taking the 4 out. I'm doing a GCF for just the second half. I'm going to be thinking 4w divided by 4. And 4w divided by 4 is w. And then I'm going to be thinking negative 28 divided by 4. Negative 28 divided by 4 is negative 7. And at this point, I'm halfway through my grouping process. I have gone from adding together 4 terms to adding together 2 terms. So my first term in our second step, that's the stuff in light blue, and my second term is the stuff that's in purple. Now I'm going to look to see what's in common and look at the parentheses. Do you notice that the parentheses are exactly the same? The w minus 7 in light blue is the same as the w minus 7 in the purple. That's our new GCF, so we're going to factor that out. So we're going to write down w minus 7 in parentheses, and the leftovers of that factoring from the blue and the purple terms will go in our second set of parentheses. So from the light blue section, the w squared is left over, so I have to write down a w squared in the second parentheses, and in the purple section, the plus 4 is left over, so I have to write down a plus 4. So my two factors are w minus 7 and w squared plus 4. Alright, for part C, we've got 4 terms, so that's going to help me to know what to do. 4 terms means I'm going to try grouping, and I'm going to have to divide up my problem into 2 sections. Our first section will be the y cubed minus y squared, and our second section will be the negative 3y plus 3. From our first section, I'm noticing there for sure is a y that is in common between those 2 terms, and the smallest exponent is a 2. So my GCF for the first part is y squared. Now let's do the division and fill in. So I'm going to be thinking y cubed divided by y squared. When I do y cubed divided by y squared, I get y left over. In my second part, I'm going to be thinking negative y squared divided by y squared, the GCF. So negative y squared divided by y squared is a negative 1. So I've got part of my factoring done. When I do the second part, the purple part, I need to use the third term's sign. So I'm going to put a minus down. I know I'm going to be taking out a minus. And now I'm going to look at the 3y plus 3. Where I'm going to be thinking about what value goes into 3y and 3. And that value that goes into both is a 3. So I've got my setup. Now we're ready to do our division. So we're thinking negative 3y divided by 3. And that is a positive y. Now we're going to be thinking positive 3 divided by negative 3, and we're going to get a negative 1 for that. So we've done half of our factoring process, and now we're getting ready to the other half. So we've gone from adding together or subtracting 4 terms to adding and subtracting just 2 terms, and now we're going to do our second level. So in our second level, we're going to see what's in common between the light blue stuff and the purple stuff. And I'm noticing that the parentheses, y minus 1, are exactly the same, so this will factor by grouping, and one of the answer factors then is going to be y minus 1. The other answer factor is going to come from the stuff that we took out. So the part that's left over in the light blue, when I take out the y minus 1, is this y squared. And the part that's left over from the purple section is going to be the minus 3. So my answer is going to be the quantity y minus 1 times the quantity y squared minus 3. And I'm all done with my factoring. Okay, so far we've done problems whose descending orders looks like a 3, 2, 1 exponent and then a constant at the end. And in this last one that really should be part D, we'll make that a D real quick, it doesn't have exponents. So in this one you're just going to kind of group things together how maybe it would make sense, and there are lots of different ways that you could group these together because we don't have really a clear descending power. So I'm going to try this one as it's typed, and if it doesn't work out well, we could maybe try to group in a different way and see what happens. Again, I'm noticing in this problem there are 4 terms, so we should try grouping. And just because we haven't done this for a little while, I'm going to look at all the terms and see if there's a value or a letter that all 4 terms have in common. Do you notice that there's no number that goes into 6, 12, 11, and 22 other than 1, and 1 doesn't really affect our process when we're doing a division. And I'm going to look at letters now. So I'm going to look at the XY, the X, the Y, and the 22. So I'm noticing that there are no GCFs because there's not a number that divides into 6, 12, 11, and 22, and there aren't letters that are in common for all 4 terms. So this one's a good candidate for factoring by grouping. So I'm going to look at my first part, my first 2 terms, and my last 2 terms, just like we've done previously. In our first 2 terms, I'm going to be thinking just about the 6xy and the 12x and think about what's in common. So if I think about the numbers 6 and 12, 6 is the greatest value that divides into both 6 and 12. And when I think about letters, I'm noticing that both the 6xy and the 12x have x's. So my GCF is a 6x. Now I'm going to be thinking dividing. So I'm going to be thinking 6xy divided by 6x. And do you notice that the 6's cancel, the x's cancel? I'm left over with just a y. Now I'm going to be thinking of 12x divided by 6x. The x's cancel, 12 divided by 6 is 2. And it's a positive 2, so I'm going to write down plus 2. Just like we did previously, I'm going to be using the third term's sign. So I'm going to put down a minus. And now I'm going to think about 11y and 22 and think about what number goes into both of those. And I know for sure 11 goes into 11 and into 22. I'm looking for letters. I don't notice that I have common letters, so I think it's just a negative 11 that we're going to be dividing out. So I'm ready to do the division. So my first level of division is going to be thinking negative 11y, the typed term, divided by negative 11. Negative 11y divided by negative 11 is going to be a positive y. Now I'm going to be thinking about negative 22 divided by negative 11. Negative 22 divided by negative 11 is a positive 2. Okay, look at the parentheses. Do you notice that the parentheses are exactly the same? So based on how we've done stuff before, we've gone currently from 4 terms to 2 terms. And my pen is kind of frozen here for a second. Hang on, guys. So our GCF from the second step is the y plus 2. So I'm going to put the y plus 2 in the front parentheses. And then the portion that's left over when we take out that y plus 2 is the 6x from the first and the negative 11 from the second. And so we've got our factoring. In each of these, I've been keeping the order the same, but some people like to write down the order differently. So if you thought this made more sense in your process, this is also correct. So you can either write down this answer or this answer, and they're the same answer. They are both correct. They are showing the two factors, and because you've got the parentheses right next to each other, you are showing that you are multiplying. Okay, so I think we've got some practice problems coming up next. So choose the pause button, try out your practice problems, and then when you're ready, check out your answers. Rats, I jumped the gun. Okay, we've got one more example. So this has 6 terms in it, and 6 terms is an even number of terms. So we're going to look for a GCF, and when I look across I see a whole lot of K's, but I don't see a K on that last term. So I know there's not a GCF, and when I look at the coefficients, I've got a 1, a negative 1, a 3, a 2, a negative 2, and a 6. I don't see a GCF other than 1 all the way across. So we're going to try grouping. And with 6 terms, what we're going to be doing when we divide up our problem is we're going to have 3 each. So we had 6 terms, we divide it into 2 pieces, so we have 3 terms in each of the pieces that we're going to look at. And we're going to go through a similar process. So in the first set, I'm noticing there are K's that are in common, and the smallest exponent I see is a 3. Then we're going to be thinking division. So we're going to be thinking K to the 5th divided by K to the 3rd, and that's K squared. Next we're going to be thinking negative K to the 4th divided by K to the 3rd, and that is negative K. And for this last blue section, we're going to be thinking 3K cubed divided by K cubed, and that is a 3. And it's a positive 3, so I'm going to write down plus. In our next group, I'm noticing that the first term in our second half is a positive, so I need to write down a plus. And now I'm going to look at the 2k squared minus 2k plus 6. There's a 2 that's in common. Now we're going to think division. So we're going to be thinking 2k squared divided by 2, and we get k squared. We're going to be thinking negative 2k divided by 2. That's a negative k. And we're going to be thinking 6 divided by 2. That's a positive 3. And you need to think through these divisions because if it doesn't work out, the parentheses wouldn't be exactly the same. Now I'm going to check, does this work out? I'm looking at the two sets of parentheses. Those two sets of parentheses are exactly the same. They are both k squared minus k plus 3's. So that is one of my factors. And my other factor comes from what we took out in our first step when we were looking at the halves of the problem. So it's the k cubed plus 2. Okay, now we're ready for the practice. Please pause the video and try out the practice problems, and when you're ready, check out the answers. Okay, so here are our answers, and again, feel free to pause the video so that you can look through and check your work. Okay, and I will circle the answers just in case. So here's the answer for part 1, for practice 2, for practice 3, and for practice 4. Okay, and our next problem here that we're going to be looking at is going to be a factoring where we're going to do two kinds of steps. So first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking for our GCF, and then we're going to be doing our factoring by grouping. So let's give this a try, please. So we've got these 4 terms, and I'm looking at all of the terms. I'm looking at the 6xy to the third minus 48xy squared minus 15xy and plus 120x. And I am feeling like I can take a 3 out of each of the coefficients. So 6 can be divided by 3, 48 can be divided by 3, 15 can be divided by 3, and 120 can also be divided by 3. So I've thought about the coefficients. Now I'm going to look at the letters. Do you guys notice that there is an x in every single term? Do you see that? Okay, great. So that means that we can take out an x also. So we're going to start off by factoring out a GCF. So when I do the GCF portion, I'm going to be thinking 6xy cubed divided by 3x, and I'm going to write down my answer. So that would be a 2y cubed. And then my next thing that I'm thinking through is negative 48xy squared divided by 3x. And for that, I'm going to get a negative 16y squared. And then I'm going to do my next term. So I'm thinking negative 15xy divided by 3x. And I'm going to write down that answer. So that answer would be negative 5y. And the last part that I'm going to be thinking through is 120x divided by 3x. 120 divided by 3 is 40, and the x's would cancel out, so I've got a plus 40. So this is my new problem that I'm going to be working through. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to take out, I'm going to look for factoring by grouping now. So I'm going to do the same kinds of stuff that we did earlier with just the stuff that's inside the parentheses. So here's my first half, and here's my second half. So in the first half, I've got 2y cubed minus 16y squared. 2 and 16 can get divided by 2, and there are letters that are in common. It's y, and their smallest exponent's a 2. So I'm going to divide out 2y squared. So I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going to be thinking 2y cubed, the typed, divided by 2y squared. And I'm going to have a y left over for that. Then I'm going to be thinking negative 16y squared divided by 2y squared. And that's going to be a negative 8. Alright, I have to use the third term sign, so I'm going to write down a minus. And now I'm going to be looking at the 5y and the 40. And I'm noticing that both of those terms can get divided by 5. So now I'm going to be thinking negative 5y divided by negative 5. That's a y. And I'm going to be thinking 40 divided by negative 5. And again, I'm choosing to divide by -5 because of this negative sign that we saw in that third term. So that looks like a pretty typical kind of thing. And then let's continue this factoring, and then we're going to go back and we're going to fix notation because we're going to have to do something to help us out with our notation. So following through with our regular process, we would notice that the y minus 8 is in common between the blue and the purple sections, and that the expressions that we took out, that we divided out, were going to go in the second set of parentheses. And now what we've got to do is we've got to make sure we've got good notation, because to remember back at the very beginning we had a GCF here, so we can't forget that in our total process. So we're going to show that through using braces around that middle section where we factored out just that expression that was inside the parentheses at the beginning that had the 4 terms in it. And then once we do our final bit of factoring, we're going to write our 3x in front. So our final answer for this one is the 3x times the quantity y minus 8 times the quantity 2y squared minus 5. So that's our process for factoring by grouping. We're going to do factoring with portions of our problems so that we go through a process of coming from a polynomial that's expressed as a sum to an expression that is equivalent, that is multiplied together. Thanks so much. I hope you guys are doing great.